So good morning once again. So I'm here to deliver a second talk about another learning strategy which will help you improve your teaching skills. And this is what we call lesson study. So a lesson study is a professional development process that teachers such as you and I engage to examine our practices. So it's basically a collaborative practice aiming to enhance teaching and learning through professional sharing of practice. So since it's professional development, it's for our own good. It's to develop our teaching and actually research skills. So since it's also collaborative, by using this process, you can learn new techniques and pedagogies in teaching and maybe correct some misconceptions because this is usually done within a group. So a lesson study can improve the experiences that the teachers provide their students, and hence it can develop students who think for themselves. So a lesson study actually produces what we call research lessons. So unlike a regular lesson, a research lessons uh, is produced in a lesson study because it's a lesson study examines or observes and evaluates what is happening in the lesson and in the classroom. So you're studying your lesson, how it affects your students. So you're actually evaluating your lessons and you are experimenting ways on how to improve your lesson. So in, for example, in an experiment, you try to introduce new methods and you try to uh, vary some quantities. So in this case, in lesson study, you can ask yourselves within the lesson study group, how about we try this? Will this make the students understand the lesson much more better? And then implement the lesson, teach the lesson, and then evaluate again if it really improved the lesson. So the lesson study has three basic stages and it forms a cycle. So the first stage of the cycle is what we call the planning stage. So in the planning of the research lesson, the group chooses the topic for the lesson and what are included in the lesson, or how will the lesson be delivered, how long is the lesson, etc. So every member of the group, the lesson study group, must be present in the planning stage. After planning, then you implement the lesson, the research lesson. So when you implement, you assign a teacher. So assign one member of your lesson study group to teach the lesson. So but unlike in a regular classroom lesson, other members of the group should be present during the implementation in order to observe the flow of the lesson and later after the lesson, when the lesson is done, comment on what went wrong, what went well. So after the implementation, you have the post-lesson activities, which are reflection and discussion. So the observers during the implementation, they are the outside eye of the implementing teachers. They will be the one to comment what went wrong, what went well, were the students bored, were the students happy, or actively participating in the activity. So after the post-lesson reflection and discussion, you again go back to the planning stage and uh, incorporate what you have reflected and discussed during the post-lesson meeting. So if you see the three stages of the lesson study, you will notice one recurring theme. and that is collaboration. So that is the key to lesson study. It's collaboration. So always do collaboration even in the planning stage and even in the implementation stage. When you are teaching the lesson, it should also be collaborative. So the other members of the group should also be observing your lesson, observing the lessons, the flow of the lesson, and the students. So during the post-lesson reflection and discussion, you may ask this question. So in which part of the lesson were the students thinking? So you try to reflect on these questions and discuss among the members of the group how to incorporate the answers to this question. So basically, you're thinking, what went well? What went well with the lesson? And in which part or parts of the lesson did the implementing teacher, the one who taught the lesson, find difficult to carry out? So basically, you're asking what went wrong. Why did the teacher have a difficulty in carrying out that part of the lesson? And you may also ask, what does the teacher think the students learned in the particular parts of the lesson? So, and basically, you're asking, what can we do to improve the lesson? So these are just the basic questions that you need to reflect and ponder during your post-lesson reflection and discussion, the third stage of the lesson study. So you may also ask, were the students bored or actively participating during the lesson? So the observers, your other members of the group who are present during the implementation of the teaching of the lesson, may be the one to answer this one. So are there students who find the lesson difficult? So how can we make it easy for them? So these are just some of the questions, deep questions that you need to ponder after implementing the lesson. Okay. So what are the key roles in lesson study? So basically, this defines what are the roles of each member of the lesson study group. So the first member is the facilitator. So the facilitator is responsible for leading meetings and coordinating group activities. So the documenter records what's going on during the meetings, especially during the planning stage and the post-lesson reflection and discussion stage. So that's the role of the documenter. So the implementer carries out the lesson, the group in which the group collaboratively develops. So he will be the implementing teacher during the actual teaching of the lesson. The observer observes and collects data about the implementation of the lesson and the students. So the observer should be present during the teaching of the lesson, during the implementation of the lesson. And lastly, the knowledgeable other. So he's an expert in content and pedagogy. And he's the one, or he or she is the one who ensures that the group develops correct skills and correct concepts to avoid misconceptions. Okay, so all of these members of the lesson study group should be present during the planning of the research lesson. And that is very important. So all of them should be present during the planning of the research lesson. But during the implementation of the lesson, aside from the implementer, the teacher who will be the one teaching the lesson, the observer must also be there. And optionally, the knowledgeable other could also be there to comment on the to later comment on some difficulties in the concept. So in the implementation stage, the knowledgeable other and the observer may not comment or correct the teacher directly during the class, because this will undermine the teacher or the implementer. Note that all of these members, actors, they're the one who made the lessons collaboratively as a group. So if there's a mistake in the lesson, it's the responsibility of the whole group. So if the observer or the knowledgeable other notice that there's some misconceptions presented during the lesson, then he will just share that observation or comment or correction during the post-lesson reflection and discussion, where again everyone or every member of the group should be present. So again, during the implementation, you should not make a comment directly or correct directly the teacher or the implementer of the lesson. Okay. So some reminders when doing lesson study. So first, you should be respectful. This is a collaboration, and every member of the group is unique. So they have their own ideas, their own cultures even. So be respectful and participate actively, especially in the planning of the lesson and in the post lesson reflection and discussion. And be willing to learn from others. So especially when you are young, or even if you are already a seasoned teacher, you still can learn from the other members of your group. Okay. So I will be answering some frequently asked questions about lesson study. So the first frequently asked question lesson study is, do we really need 5 members of our lesson study group? Because there are 5 key roles? No, not necessarily. So some roles can all actually be done by just one person. For example, the documenter and the observer or the facilitator can just be one person. Or the implementer and the facilitator can be just one person. And within your group, the roles are not fixed. The roles are not fixed, okay? On the implementation, you will be the implementer, and the other member of the group will be the observer. And on another time, you will become the observer, and the other member will be the implementer. Or in one meeting, if the documenter is absent, then you become the documenter. And so the roles are not fixed for every group. It doesn't mean that you're always the facilitator, you're always the documenter, you're always the implementer, and knowledgeable other, and so on. So the answer to this question is, it's not necessarily, but you cannot do it alone. Meaning, the minimum number of members for a lesson study group is at least 2. So at least you have a partner. So your partner could have 3 roles, and you can have 2 roles, or you can have 3 roles, and your partner can have 2 roles. So like that. So another frequently asked question is, what if I don't have other teachers in my school who teach the same subject? What if I'm the only one teaching physics in my school? I'm the only one teaching chemistry in my school. Or I'm the only one teaching a very specific chemistry or physics subject. So the good thing about lesson study is that it is not limited by geographical boundaries. You can actually collaborate with your friends from other schools, or other teachers from other schools, or other teachers from other countries. So you can just have a Facebook meeting, or Google Meet meeting, or Zoom meeting if you want to have a planning session or a post-lesson reflection and discussion meeting. So that one, it's not limited by geographical boundaries. So another common question, aren't we already doing lesson study because we are collaboratively making our lessons? Yes, but not quite, because sometimes we forget to have a post-lesson reflection and discussion. So sometimes we do the planning, we do the implementation, but we forget the post-lesson reflection and discussion to check if what went wrong with our lesson, what went well with our lessons, how can we improve our lesson so that we can plan again and reteach the lesson with now more inputs from the group and from the students. So that one. So we're actually partially doing lesson study right now, especially right now in the pandemic, that most of us have the same subjects, and we just group together in our LMS and create just one video lessons for all of the sections. But again, we forgot usually to evaluate our lesson, have a post lesson reflection and discussion in our lesson. So, last frequently asked question on lesson study. Do I need to do lesson study for every lesson in my subject? Not quite. Not necessarily, but it would be really good if you do lesson study for every lesson. But it is time consuming. It will take up uh, time, and I think time, all of us are not so uh, we're not so gifted with time. We're always in a hurry. Our time is always limited. So if you want to start with lesson study, I suggest that you do a lesson study on a very hard learning competency, on a very hard and on a lesson that you think is very hard, because that is the way how to improve your teaching. So on that very hard lesson, so a lesson that you find it very hard to, very difficult to teach, so you start with that, and maybe after 3 or 5 years you can complete, you have undergone lesson study in all of your lessons. Not necessarily that in one semester you do lesson studies for all of your lessons. So okay, so these are just some frequently asked questions about lesson study. And if you have questions, you may ask them now. So thank you for listening to this lecture.